Just another evening in Canambebe State Park in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Biologist Marcelo Cupello, just like every week, sits down to review the images from the camera traps from the last few days. It's routine work, almost automatic. A bird, a branch swaying in the wind, a rodent scurrying past the base of a tree. Nothing special, the usual set of shots he had seen hundreds of times before. And then suddenly, Marcelo freezes. He stares intently at the screen, as if he can't believe his own eyes. His first thought is that one of his colleagues decided to play a prank on him and slipped in a picture from somewhere else. He calls over the other park employees, and a minute later, the whole team is gathered around the monitor. Everyone is looking at the screen and silent, because no one fully understands what is happening. The camera trap had captured an animal that had not been seen in this area for over 100 years. Marcelo clicks to the next image, and the following frame leaves the whole group even more stunned. This time, the animal is not alone. There are two young ones with it. One of the employees moves closer to the screen. Another asks to double-check the date of the recording, as if there could be a mistake in the file. On the screen was a South American tapir, a large animal the size of a calf, calmly wandering through the forest as if it had always lived there. But how did it get here? Where did it even come from? And if at least 3 individuals with young ones were caught on camera, how many of them are actually out there, in a forest that was considered empty of this animal for more than a century? Canambebe Park is spread across the mountainous part of the state of Rio de Janeiro and is one of the most significant protected areas in the region. It is here that Marcelo Cupello has been studying the condition of the local forests for many years, which is why the unusual find immediately caught the attention of specialists. That very same day, the researchers head out to the spot where the camera was installed. Large hoofprints are clearly visible on the damp ground, and fresh droppings are discovered nearby. Now the photographs are no longer the only proof of the animal's presence. Each of these findings on its own could still have been a coincidence. However, the images, tracks, and other signs all come together to form a single picture. Everything points to the fact that a small group of tapirs has been living in the forest for a long time, not just one animal that wandered in by chance. The last official mention of the South American tapir in these parts dates back to 1914. After that, for decades, there was not a single confirmed sighting. So, most experts believe that the local population had disappeared for good. During this time, several generations of people had come and gone. The world had lived through wars, technological revolutions, and the rapid growth of cities. All this time, the enormous beast was either truly absent or had hidden itself so skillfully that it left behind no convincing traces. It is important to remember that over a century ago, researchers did not have modern camera traps. Even the most experienced expeditions could only cover a small fraction of the vast forest. So the absence of sightings did not always mean the complete disappearance of the species. The main mystery was not at all that the tapir had been photographed. It was much harder to understand how such a large animal could remain unnoticed for so long right next to one of the most densely populated regions of Brazil. The South American tapir is recognized as the largest land mammal on its continent. An adult can weigh up to 300 kilograms, has a massive body, and a short, flexible snout, which it uses to easily get leaves, fruits, and young shoots. For all its impressive size, the tapir behaves with surprising caution. It stays in dense thickets, comes out to feed mainly at night, and avoids humans at all costs. This very secretiveness could well have been one of the reasons why its presence went unnoticed for so long. A tapir's appearance looks unusual, even compared to other rainforest inhabitants. Its short, flexible snout is nothing like an elephant's trunk, but it's perfectly suited for the job of finding food. With its help, the animal effortlessly plucks leaves, fruits, and young shoots from the dense undergrowth. Scientists classify tapirs as odd-toed ungulates, so their closest living relatives are not pigs, as it might seem at first glance, but rather horses and rhinoceroses. Their common evolutionary branch originated many tens of millions of years ago. Over such a vast period of existence, the appearance of tapirs has changed very little. While some large mammals went extinct and others adapted to new living conditions, this animal has retained a body structure that proved to be surprisingly successful for life in a forest environment. The young look completely different from the adults. Their dark fur is adorned with light stripes and spots, which help the babies blend in almost perfectly with the dappled sunlight and dense undergrowth, keeping them practically invisible to most predators. This pattern only lasts for the first few months of life. Over time, the spots disappear, the fur becomes a solid color, and the young tapir starts to look more and more like the adults. This is precisely why the appearance of babies in photographs indicates that breeding is happening right in this forest. In the ecosystem, the tapir plays a much more significant role than one might assume based on its unhurried way of life. The core of its diet is made up of fruits, and along with them, the animal swallows large seeds, which later end up far from the trees that produced them. Some plants are almost entirely dependent on large distributors like these. Smaller animals are simply unable to swallow the heavy seeds, so it's the tapir that takes on the role of forest restorer, spreading the beginnings of new trees over vast distances. Despite its considerable size, the tapir has natural enemies. The greatest threat comes from the jaguar, which can attack even adult animals. Nevertheless, over millions of years, both species have developed the ability to coexist, continuously adapting to one another. When fleeing a chase, a tapir often heads for the nearest body of water. It's an excellent swimmer, dives confidently, and can remain almost invisible underwater for long periods, sticking only the tip of its short trunk above the surface to breathe. Predators have been a part of the tapir's life throughout its evolution. But it was humans who became the threat the animals simply didn't have time to adapt to. The fate of this species began to change long before the first reserves and conservation programs appeared. With the arrival of European colonizers, the pressure on the population began to grow rapidly. Tapirs were hunted for their meat and tough hides, and the relentless deforestation gradually stripped the animals of their natural habitats and safe shelters. The process of their disappearance stretched over many generations. The populations dwindled not as a result of a single major catastrophe, but gradually, area by area. Eventually, tapirs completely vanished from many regions of southeastern Brazil, including the territories surrounding the modern Cunhambebe Park. At the same time, the Atlantic forest itself was changing. It once stretched in a continuous band along most of the country's coast, forming one of South America's richest natural systems, with an incredible diversity of unique plants and animals. Today, only a small fraction of this forest's former domain has survived. In place of a single expanse, there are now dozens of scattered patches, separated by roads, cities, farmlands, and industrial zones, which significantly complicates the movement of large wild animals. For small birds or some monkeys, such obstacles are not always insurmountable. But for a large animal weighing several hundred pounds, it is much harder to safely cross open spaces filled with people, vehicles, and various economic activities. It is for this very reason that every surviving patch of forest takes on special significance. These areas become the last refuges for animals that need vast spaces, reliable food sources, and the ability to exist far from the constant presence of humans. The paradox is that the Atlantic forest is nothing like a distant, wild backcountry. More than half of Brazil's population lives here. The country's largest cities are located here, and millions of people spend every day within a few dozen miles of these forests. This is precisely why the discovery of the tapirs sparked such widespread interest. It wasn't about some remote sanctuary somewhere deep in the continent, but about a territory bordering one of the most densely populated regions in all of South America. After the finding was confirmed, a new question arose for the scientists. If a small group really does live here permanently, then how did it manage to survive in conditions where human influence is felt almost everywhere? There is no definitive answer to this question just yet. Nevertheless, specialists are considering several of the most likely explanations, each of which is based on the real features of the local nature, the history of the park itself, and the behavior of these exceptionally cautious animals. The first theory suggests that the tapirs never actually disappeared completely. A small group could have held on for decades in the most inaccessible corners of the Atlantic forest, steering clear of people, roads, and places where scientific observations were traditionally conducted. At first glance, such an explanation seems unbelievable. However, the dense mountain forest is made up of countless deep ravines, steep slopes, and almost impassable thickets. Even modern research can only cover a fraction of such territories, leaving vast areas virtually untouched. The animal's typical way of life serves as an additional advantage for them. Tapirs primarily come out to forage after dark. They keep quiet and avoid open spaces. This kind of caution makes a chance encounter with a human extremely unlikely. If this theory is confirmed, it will fundamentally change scientists' views on the fate of the local population. It would mean that the disappearance only existed on paper in scientific reports, while the animals themselves continued to live within their historical range all this time. The second theory offers a completely different explanation for the discovery. According to this hypothesis, the tapirs appeared in the park relatively recently, gradually migrating here from neighboring forest areas, where small populations managed to survive much better. This kind of migration would be impossible without the natural corridors connecting the separate fragments of the Atlantic forest. Even after massive deforestation, narrow strips of vegetation survived between some areas, allowing large animals to gradually move through them. If this is the route that brought the tapirs to Cunhambebe, it means these corridors are still serving their purpose. This is an extremely important conclusion for conservation programs, as it confirms that the fragmented forest areas still remain connected to one another. Additionally, a discovery like this suggests that it's not just lone individuals that are capable of relocating. Given a safe route, entire family groups can gradually settle new territories, which significantly increases the species' chances of establishing itself in a new location. There is also a third explanation, which has less to do with the animals themselves and more to do with changes within the park. In recent years, the level of protection in the area has noticeably increased, and the pressure from human activity has started to ease up. After being granted official conservation status, the fight against poaching was ramped up, illegal logging was reduced, and constant monitoring of the forest's condition was established. As a result, the conditions may have gradually become favorable enough for the return of large mammals. Not one of the three hypotheses has been definitively confirmed yet. It's quite likely that the real situation is due to a combination of several factors. The animal's cautious nature, the surviving natural corridors, and the gradual regrowth of forests could very well have all worked together. Whichever explanation ultimately turns out to be the most accurate, the discovery itself has already managed to change scientists' views on the state of affairs in this region. It has demonstrated that even ecosystems profoundly altered by humans sometimes hold a much greater potential for recovery than was previously imagined. The story of the South American tapir becomes even more fascinating when you look at its closest relatives. Today, scientists recognize the existence of 4 modern species, each of which has adapted to completely different natural conditions. Besides the South American species, there is the Baird's tapir, which inhabits Central America. the mountain tapir found in the high-altitude regions of the Andes, and also the Malayan tapir, the only member of the family living outside the American continent. The mountain tapir is generally considered the most unusual among them. Unlike its relatives, it lives at a significant altitude, where the temperature is noticeably lower. This is why its body is covered with a thick, woolly coat, which helps it retain heat in the cool climate. This species is so rare and wary that observing it in the wild is extremely difficult. Researchers get most of their information from automatic camera traps, which operate for months in hard-to-reach corners of mountain forests without any constant human presence. A few years ago, the tapir family once again drew the close attention of the scientific community. Researchers announced the possible discovery of another large species, which is considered an exceptionally rare event for modern mammals. Subsequently, some specialists called this conclusion into question. New genetic studies showed that the discovered animals might be an unusual population of an already known species. Therefore, the question of their status as a separate species remains a subject of scientific debate to this day. Discoveries like this don't just happen with tapirs. In recent decades, camera traps have more than once helped find animals that were thought to have disappeared from certain territories for many decades, and sometimes for more than a century. Every such case is a reminder of just how incomplete human knowledge about remote natural areas still is. Modern technologies allow us to see what was previously hidden for years in dense forests, gradually changing scientists' understanding of wildlife. For the park staff, the discovery wasn't an occasion for big announcements, but the beginning of a long and meticulous process. The photographs alone weren't enough, so the researchers continued to set up new cameras, document tracks, and gradually gather information about the hidden population. Over time, the trail cams captured the animals in different parts of the forest. This allowed them to roughly determine the boundaries of the territory the tapirs use, and also to understand which routes they most frequently travel between their feeding and resting spots. The regular appearance of young animals proved to be especially important. If offspring continue to be born, it means the population isn't just surviving, but is self-sustaining, not dependent on the random appearance of individuals from elsewhere. However, the small population size remains a serious problem. Any isolated group is far more vulnerable to diseases, natural disasters, and unforeseen events than a large population spread over a vast territory with a constant exchange of individuals. This is precisely why scientists are continuing to explore the neighboring forest areas. If they can confirm the existence of other groups, it will provide a better understanding of whether these groups are connected or if they exist completely independently of one another. The data obtained is important for more than just one species. Experts often judge the overall health of an ecosystem by the presence of large herbivores, since these animals are especially sensitive to habitat destruction and constant disturbance from humans. The tapir's return shows that even a seriously damaged forest can gradually recover if it's given enough time and reliable protection. This process takes decades, but its results sometimes exceed the most cautious forecasts from specialists. At the same time, this story doesn't mean at all that nature is no longer threatened. Illegal logging, road construction, and the further fragmentation of forests still remain the main factors holding back the recovery of large animals. Therefore, the fate of this small population is largely determined by decisions being made right now. Preserving individual forest patches only makes sense if there's a way for wild animals to pass safely between them. A single series of photographs became a reminder that nature doesn't always fit into human predictions. Sometimes the most unexpected discoveries happen in the very places where scientists had almost lost hope for good news. The story of Kunambebi Park is a reminder of how cautiously we should approach declarations about the complete extinction of any given species. Sometimes, nature turns out to be far more complex than we imagine, and a lack of sightings does not necessarily mean the animals are truly gone for good. At the same time, this discovery in no way diminishes the scale of the problem. The South American tapir still remains a species threatened by deforestation, poaching, and the steady expansion of human-developed territories. That is why every surviving population is of colossal importance. Even a small group of individuals can hold on to unique genetic diversity that, in the future, could help the species recover its numbers in places where it once disappeared. For the researchers, this story became a rare example of how many years of painstaking work can yield tangible results. The decisive role was played not by chance or luck, but by systematic observation, patience, and the continuous collection of data over many long years. It is quite likely that other hard-to-reach corners of the Atlantic forest are still hiding animals whose existence scientists have no idea about yet. Any new expedition has the potential to fundamentally change how we perceive modern wildlife. This is precisely why discoveries like this generate such a buzz throughout the entire scientific community. They don't just expand the list of known habitats for individual species. They also allow for a deeper understanding of how complex natural ecosystems are structured. A single photograph became the starting point for a major scientific story. It served as a reminder that even after more than a century, nature still knows how to surprise those who continue to watch it closely, ask questions, and search for answers in the quietest, most hidden corners of the forest.